first thing I'm going to do, since we're talking about relationships, this is a big room and we are really spread out. I'm going to ask you to do something uncomfortable and get up where you are and come closer to the front if you could. I mean, we're talking about meaningful relationships, and how could we do that if I can't even really see that far? If you're not comfortable doing that, I understand, but if you could, that would make me feel a little better. So thank you. I appreciate that. I want to thank the folks that have put this conference on. It really is a tremendous thing. I've already learned so much this morning at the table where I was, and certainly the topic that we're going to be talking about, meaningful relationship, is something I'm passionate about, but probably no one in the room is an expert on. So I really want to start off today by introducing you to a good friend of mine. This is Mr. Willie Fleming. I met Willie Fleming in 2003, which it's amazing how long ago that was. Mr. Fleming and I, he was an attorney, and I lived in Shelbyville, and in Shelbyville, Mr. Fleming would represent clients there, and we ended up working on a deal together. So I'm in the commercial real estate business, and often our deals can go for a very long time. So whether you want a relationship or not, you're going to have one. Whether you make it meaningful or not, I guess you have to decide, but it could be 2 years before a deal starts and before it closes. So over the course of that 2 years, Mr. Fleming and I became really good friends. And, you know, in the course of doing business and working on a transaction, oftentimes you're focused on what you need to talk about. But Mr. Fleming was not that way. He would always ask me how my family was. He was so dignified in his approach and so professional. And that made me really curious. So in the approach that he took, in my curiosity, I started asking him, Mr. Fleming, what other deals do you work on? What else do you do with your time? And he said, well, you know, I work on certain deals in certain locations. And I started, well, what deals do you work on? And he started to tell me, well, in some of the impoverished areas in town, I help families. And then I was so curious because he was so dignified. And I said, tell me about these properties. Maybe we can work together on some more stuff. You know, if you're in sales, you're always trying to build your pipeline, right? And so I would ask Mr. Fleming this. He said, well, you know, this is down on Bradshaw Street and some of these other places. And he said, sometimes the clients that I work for, they don't have the money to pay for an attorney. You see, they come from a situation where someone had given them the property, but they never wrote it up in a deed because it was just like, hey, this is, you know, the fence post is here and the tree is there and this is my area right here and you can have it, you know, and did that 2 or 3 times. Well, the problem is when his friends went to sell these properties, they couldn't get a deed for them and they couldn't transfer the property. In addition, they would have problems satisfying their property taxes because of the issues of that. Or they didn't have the education and even know that they needed these kinds of things because it was all based on family and your word. And I would ask him about these processes, and I found out some of those deals that he was working on, they were longer than the deal that me and him were working on. You know, these things would go on in court for several years. The other challenge is sometimes they would want to mortgage their property, to use the equity in their property to help their family buy more property or to send their kids to school. But they couldn't mortgage their property because they didn't have a deed. Mr. Fleming knew about these needs, and I started to understand the significance that he was adding. And again, that made me really curious because growing up, in a home where I had a father who believed in me and wanted me to do well, helped me get my start, not by giving me money, but just by believing in me and setting out, you know, some guardrails in my life. You ought to think about this. Have you ever considered this? Those kind of questions, those are important questions to ask your kid, even though at the time it feels like it's an annoying thing that because your dad will ask you these open-ended questions and you don't have the answer for them, and he's wanting you to think about those things. And so those things were very meaningful in my life, but watching Mr. Fleming use his professional time to do such meaningful work really had a huge impact on me. And again, this is in 2003, and I also noticed that he had done so much valuable work. You talk about adding value. Sometimes we look at that in the business world as like, hey, well, your return on equity is 6 and I can make it an 8. That's great. But I'm talking about real value where someone can recognize and be able to put on public display that they actually own the property. And we all know what it means to have a good balance sheet and what it means to actually have ownership, and that's the first steps in growing towards perhaps wealth in your life. So I would spend time with him, I would get off the phone, and I would reflect. And again, his manner was so professional. So what I figured out was this man was doing extremely meaningful work. And in doing that, he promoted a curiosity in me. And that curiosity led me to ask questions about meaningful things. And so he was the first person that led with value, with significance, others first, others oriented, and not really for his own good, using his professional ability to help someone in a very sincere and significant way. And that is how you build meaningful relationships. That's probably all I need to say. And with Mr. Fleming's story, we can all feel a common bond towards what it means to build meaningful relationships. And so, promoting curiosity and leading those things towards conversations and doing meaningful work really began to stick with me. So for today, since this is my topic, and I was telling Ryan, I said, now, I got 20 minutes and then we're going to do 5 minutes of questions. And he said, you actually have an hour. So you won't be disappointed if I go around 20 minutes, maybe a little more. Because I was supposed to go 20, so I'll go a little over, but it worked. Whatever you had said to me before to keep me within my time constraints, I have about half that. So, but it is a brief topic, and hopefully today I can spur your thinking on a little bit as it spurred mine on. I'm no expert in this, as I mentioned, and again, I've learned so much from somebody at our table this morning that already was being assertive and so passionate about their call. It's so good to be with you. So I hope that this would be seen as something practical for you, something that has application. I don't think we need self-help, and I'm not going to give you a to-do list, okay? I'm just going to share this story. I'm going to share these experiences, and I hope that it has application. And I know the fact that you're in this room tells me that this is important to you, this idea of business and ministry. So you don't need me to tell you why you came today, but maybe together we can learn from each other on how we can apply these ideas. And it was mentioned in the first time, and I always appreciate this, I have gotten into so many things in my life by accident and with great hesitancy. Some of you may have already had it all figured out and had a great plan. Adrian and I were talking earlier. I said, I've got 2 tools that I like to bring. That's authenticity and transparency. And as I bring those forward, I think we might connect on the idea of what it means to build meaningful relationships. As business marketplace leaders, if we aspire to do meaningful work and build meaningful relationships, you have to understand if you're really out there in the marketplace, you're going against the grain immediately. It's not like, oh, this is cool, I'm building these relationships and then, one day, whatever. No, it's like immediately, if you're trying to do something meaningful that's sort of beyond the transaction, you begin to understand very quickly that this is something that you're going to feel alone in often. And so I'm grateful to be here, and I wanted to think about the idea of meaningful Ryan, you mentioned our kids, Walker, Warren, and Wells. My daughter is Warren. We call her Rennie, and they all have a W alliteration. They're Warren Webb, Walker Webb, Wells Webb. It kind of started, Walker was our first, and then we just kind of kept the ball going. So I don't know if it's because I also preach sometimes. I think about, the word meaningful. Well, then you got to have 3 M's to go with that, right? pretty corny, but that's what we're going to focus on today as we unpack meaningfulness. I want us to think about 3 areas that we can do that in. The first is mindset. The next is mission. And the third is methods. Now, I'm a guy, since I'm an entrepreneur, that likes to think a lot about vision and calling. And as I process how I want to spend my time and be most effective with my time, I'm always trying to filter that through. What has God created me to do specifically? What are the passions and gifts that I have, not unlike you? And then how do I leverage those things the best that I can to pursue this vision? I love that idea, but in business and in the marketplace, having a vision is important. But if you're really in it, what's more important is the moment to moment. It's okay to have a vision statement, and I believe in that, and I'm going to share ours with you. But it's more about having a mindset to me. And as I think about a mindset, I have to tell you the story of how I got to where our mindset as a company is and as a family is. And so I want to share this passage with you. This is the Message translation. It says, "The altar from which God gives us the gift of Himself is not for exploitation by insiders who grab and loot. In the old system, the animals are killed and the bodies disposed of outside the camp. The blood is then brought inside to the altar as a sacrifice for sin. It's the same with Jesus. He was crucified outside the city gates. That is where He poured out the sacrificial blood that was brought to God's altar to cleanse His people. So, let's go outside where Jesus is, where the action is. Not trying to be privileged insiders, but taking our share in the abuse of Jesus. This insider world is not our home. We have our eyes peeled for the city about to come. Let's take our place outside with Jesus. No longer pouring out the sacrificial blood of animals, but pouring out sacrificial praises from our lips to God in Jesus' name." One morning in 2008, I got up, and it was before my wife had gotten up, and I don't do this every morning, but I grabbed my Bible, and I went to the closet, turned on the light amongst the smelly laundry and everything else, trying to be quiet because we had a newborn son, and I thought, I need to read my Bible, but I don't know where to start. Maybe you, in your reading of God's Word, know where to start every time. I really don't. So I get up, and in these pages that you can't hardly see, I turn to the last chapter in the book of Hebrews. Now, this is not Philippians 4, John 3, this isn't a place you would turn to. And I read this passage, and it's talking about this great high priest, this once and for all, this idea of suffering, of blood, of dealing with this awful place, the outside, where Jesus hung on the cross for us. He didn't stay inside where it was comfortable. He went outside. This is the same place that they took the bodies in the old ways for the sacrifices. once they killed those bodies, they didn't bring those back in the house. They left them outside. That's where Jesus died for us, out there with the dead bodies. Can you imagine the smell of those dead bodies, those animals? And they took the blood and they brought it inside. That is what made us clean. But just think for a second, and if you've read the book of Hebrews, about our great high king, our once and for all, going outside where he didn't need to go for you and I. And think about that as a place. Now, as you think about that as a place, I want you to think about that as a person. If you trace back in the Old Testament, by the way, that led me to Leviticus, which I didn't intend on spending time in that morning either. Studying about the sacrifice of animals, and as I did that, I noticed the people that were on the outside. Who here knows who would be on the outside of the city during those times? Lepers. Lepers were on the outside. Why were they on the outside? They were unclean. And if a leper saw someone coming close to them, what did they have to do? Cry out. Stay away. Get away. Because I'm unclean. And in the process, to get clean, go to Leviticus. If you don't do anything else, and you're like, what's this have to do with meaningful relationships? Everything. If you don't do anything else, read about the process that you have to do to get re-entered. Outside is a place, but way more important than that, outside is a person. Now you're the same as me in this, but maybe you're a little better than me. But I started to reflect on, that was me. I'm the person yelling unclean. I'm the person that needs someone to clean me. Now, I'd known Jesus, was saved at the age of 12. But now I want you to put Willie Fleming's story right in the middle of reading that text. And I want you to see how Willie's going at his job. And then I want you to think about Jesus, the ultimate outsider. He's the one that went to that place for that person, for you and I, to clean us up. And He did. He cleaned us up, right? In that awful place. So what I was missing was, how do you take the vision and the idea and the saving grace of that into your workplace? And I ran over and I woke Rachel up. And if you're like me at all with your significant other, your spouse, and you walk in the room, in the bedroom, and she's in there sleeping, and I wake her up and I said, I finally found it. She was like, what? And I'm like, look at this passage and look what it is. She's like, what are you talking about? I don't, but you need, and what are we going to do? And she's like, go back to bed. So I go back to my closet, but I went back changed. Because I started thinking about Willie Fleming, and I started thinking about Jesus, and I started to think about, do I want to be an outsider or an insider? Now, when you first get in business, what you're told is, you got to get on the inside. Now, I'm from Shelby County, and in Shelby County, especially at that time, well, you got to be on the inside. Now, you got to be in this room, and if you get in this room, maybe they'll ask you to be on the Chamber of Commerce board. And if you get on the Chamber of Commerce board, then maybe they'll ask you to be a diplomat. And then you can go around and, give people their first dollar, and, people start to think you might be something a little special, right? But I'm trying to get some business. Ain't nothing wrong with that. So as I went around and gave these first dollars, then they're like, hey, have you ever thought about, maybe being on an executive committee? And I was like, oh, I'd love that. put me on executive committee. And I get on executive committee, and then I start thinking, man, I wonder if I might, one day be president-elect, And I'm acting, all shucks about it, But I'm hoping, this is going to happen for me. Because I need to be where the privilege is. So I get on the inside, and then I get asked to be the president of the chamber, and then I'm president of the chamber. But I still got this story about, all these things in my head, and I'm trying to wrestle with this. Once I became chamber president, then one of the local banks noticed, this kid, he's doing some work, and he's making some things happen. He's on the chamber. We need to get him on our board, on our bank board. Now, you get on a bank board in a small town. Now, what if maybe I can get on the loan committee? Now I'm on the loan committee on the bank board. Now I'm really on the inside. Anybody that wants to do anything in town, they're going to bring their deal to the bank, to the local bank. We're going to look at the loan. We're going to decide. We're going to know what everything that's going on. We're going to make the decision on whether or not this is going to happen or not. Right? It wasn't morally bad what I was doing and trying to pursue. I wanted to grow my business. I wanted to be successful. But my mindset was not there because in my mind, I was trying to become an insider. You fast forward to this story about Willie Fleming, and you fast forward to this scripture, and you can't stay on the inside. And so God shifted my mindset from being an insider to an outsider. Now I'm free. Now I'm talking about ideas like taking what I have to use for others, just like my friend Willie did. Now I'm thinking in my mind, what does it look like to be an outsider so that if I could leverage all the gifts that have been given me to give it to someone who doesn't have what I have? That's messed up my whole mind. Wait a minute, man, you're on the loan committee. What are you doing? But in that shift, I started to recognize and see God at work. And I started to see what He was doing. I remember one day I was driving down the street on Washington Street, and there was this place there called Operation Care. And Operation Care, they have everything to help everyone. They had food bank. They helped people with their rent if they needed it, if they couldn't pay their gas bill. There was a line of people wrapped around and outside of the building. On Tuesdays, it was like a $2 bag. So if you had a bag, you could fill it full of whatever was you wanted to. And I drove by there. And again, I'm just being honest with you. Maybe you've got all this figured out. But I'm driving by this building and God's like, stop and go in there. I'm like, no, I'm not going in there. Drive by the next day. Stop, go in there. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. Drive by the next day. This is how good God is. Drive by the next day. I pull over and roll down the window and look out there and roll my window back up, drive off. Come back the next day. I get out of the car. And this day happens to be that Tuesday, where it was really packed. And I thought, well, I could go in there and they probably won't see me. They won't know because, I'm working on something here. I'm trying to do something. And so, I can't be seen with people that need to get their stuff together because I'm trying to do something. And so I go in there and there's this lady in there named Judy Roberts, and she's about 5'1". And I looked across the room at her and she saw my face when I came in. And I don't know if y'all know anything about Mamaw's discernment. I'm talking about Mamaw. I'm not talking about grandmother. I'm talking about Mamaw. When Mamaw looks at you and she says, child, what's wrong with you? What you all worried about? Stuff like that. And I'm like, well, I was just coming to get some mashed potatoes and lima beans, and come on, Mamaw. And she's like, no, you're here for another reason. And then you realize that's why she made the mashed potatoes and lima beans. But Judy looked at me like Mamaw did. And I'll never forget, it's like the room stopped. And she said, I came in here 20 years ago, just like you. And I've never left. And I said, Judy, that sounds awful. Why didn't you leave? She's like, Well, I just saw God at work and they needed help, so I just started helping. It's been the best thing I've ever done. And I walked out and I thought, oh my gosh, what does this mean, right? And so in that mindset, right, the idea of going outside really helped to formulate what my actions would be. And so often we'll have an experience like that and we want to make a quick decision, just like when I went over to Rachel. And I'm like, hey, here's what it is. But God was working on my heart. He was planting seeds. He was doing work in me. It wasn't time. I'm an action-oriented guy. I'm ready to do something, you know. And she's like, I don't understand, and you're crazy, go back to bed. And I'm like, that's not what I was looking for from encouragement from you, but I love you anyway. You know, I didn't have any answers, and Judy didn't give me any answers, but I walked out of there and I thought, oh crap, I'm going to be working in one of these buildings the rest of my life. A mindset to go outside. So as I journeyed with that, I started to discover ways that God might use my gifts. I reflected a lot on 1 Peter 4:10, which talks about God has given each of us a gift. If you said yes to Jesus, you have at least one spiritual gift amongst your talents and abilities. But that gift is not for you. It's for you to administer God's grace, and that speaks to efficiency. So I told you I'm free. I've got the right mindset. Now I've got these talents and abilities, like we all do. I've got gifts. But I had to learn the second part, that it wasn't for me. And once God unlocked that in me, then I can just go around and start asking questions. How can I serve you? What do you need? If you have the right mindset and you ask those questions, you'll don't worry about what you need to do. There's so many needs out there, and if you're moving in step with God and He's called you to step into that unknown, into the outside, and I think that's what's really hard for a lot of people. They don't want to ask that question because it might put at risk the comfort that they built, the privilege that they've gotten, the loan committee position, so to speak. But I discovered through God's grace there was more joy in just being with Him. That's what the whole exercise of going outside is anyway. It's not so that I can do something and so that I can feel good and be on purpose. It's being closer with Him. It said Jesus is where the action is. So when He calls us out, it's so that we can be with Him. Not that we don't have a relationship with Him and that we won't be in heaven forever, but then we can be on mission with Him moment to moment and day to day. And God had to change my mindset. And I spent a little extra time on that because I think it's a critical foundation piece for building meaningful relationships. So, mindset is the idea of being in motion, right? It's kind of like an ongoing filter. And I wanted to share our team with you, kind of how that translated for us. I mentioned to you I'm in the commercial real estate business in Shelbyville. And this is a picture of our team. There's 5 of us on our team, and it's been really cool for us to build that team over the last few years, even though we've been in the business for 25 years. Part of my story on that idea of going outside was I started asking people what they needed, and as I asked people what they needed, we started serving, and as we started fulfilling those needs, a bunch of people started coming around those needs, and then we accidentally planted a church. So then I accidentally became a planting pastor, a founding pastor of a church. But I didn't leave my business. I was just doing that volunteer because I was totally equipped. But I had no formal training. You understand what I mean? Like, I didn't go to seminary and think I ought to be doing this. I was just doing what God was doing, and that just led into that. So we're like, well, how do you do that volunteer for 5 years and run a business? I don't know. It may be the worst thing you could do. It may be totally unadvisable for you. What's not unadvisable is joining God where He's at work and doing what He's calling you to do no matter where you are. So whatever that is, and whatever people around you have to do to process that, that's on them to process that. I don't know. I'm just going to be with Him and just go where He's going. And that's just kind of what we what we followed as our family. And so the way we describe that in our company is the idea of beyond the transaction. It's kind of the way in the business world that we say go outside, right? And so the idea of going beyond the transaction should inspire you to think more than just, I'm going to do a deal, I'm going to get a sale, that I should put people over projects, right? And how do we do that in a real sincere way? We do that in community as a team, and we talk about that. And so this beyond the transaction is really the mindset that our company approaches moment to moment. Somebody tells you something that's not true. Somebody says they want to use your services and they go use somebody else. I mean, all day long it's repeat. Somebody said they're going to get back to you. They don't get back to you. Nobody returns your call. You call somebody else. They say they want to write a contract right there in that moment. How are you going to? This is stuff that's going on every day for us, moment to moment. And so this idea of going beyond the transaction is what drives us. So I feel like my job as a leader of our team is to try to provide that environment and keep us on task with the vision that God's given us to go beyond the transaction. That's really my role, is to get in behind our team and figure out how they can do what Mr. Fleming was doing over and over again. They say, well, how can you be profitable doing that? It's real funny how you take care of people and add value, how you can also become profitable. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. How would you do that as a small independent company? I don't know how you don't do that. I really haven't figured that out. So we have a lot of corporate competitors. We have people that have a lot of bells and whistles. And we focus on that vision that God's given us. And there'll be people here today that can help you think through the HR side and how to build a team and how to... Listen, our team does best when we're on mission with the vision God's given us, which is to be outside. So we're not going to build any meaningful relationships if we sit around in a holy huddle. That ain't going to happen, for we're not living on the vision that God's given us, the vision to be outsiders and to go beyond the transaction. And so we look for opportunities that would inspire us to do that, and that is really the way that we have developed our mindset. So my question for you is, with your mindset and your team, and maybe it's just you by yourself, because I've worked by myself for numerous years inside of these 25 years, what is your mindset? Do you need to develop a mindset? Have you thought about that? Do you need to change your mindset? What is it that you need to do with your mindset as you think about that being the foundation for how you're even going to begin to be in a relationship with somebody? Mindset. You know, our thinking has got to be way beyond what we would say in the old days, the cash register, right? We got to build a pipeline and we got to build relationships, and that leads to profitability. But if we don't do the real meaningful work in the middle of it, it's really not worth being in business for yourself. Why would you do this if you couldn't do something meaningful? Why would any of us do anything we do if we couldn't do something meaningful? Something to think about. Everybody doing okay? I turned in a little bit of a preacher there. See, I can do that. Now we can talk about capitalization rates and IRR and how to calculate a proper NOI and do all that. You know, that's the other side of my brain, and oftentimes those things kind of come together. You meet with a client and they'll be like, hey, what's the cap rate? You better be able to tell them the answer. Oh, let me tell you about our vision of our company. They don't want to hear about that. They ask you about the cap rate. Now the next person that come in may ask you something, and the questions that we get aren't always, tell me about how you filter out, blah, blah, blah. They're like, hey, almost the same way I asked Mr. Fleming. It was curiosity that led to the conversation, right? What, did you help start a church? Like, what? Well, how did that happen? You know, it's conversations like that, right? And so I've just found myself real busy just having those conversations as we've gone on the journey. So Now I want to talk about the mission, right? So we talked about the mindset. The mission is sort of how we apply that mindset every day. Everybody talks about having a mission statement. This is our vision, this is our mission. This is how we go about doing what God's called us to do every day. But it's interesting, I've learned with a mission, it doesn't feel like it has a lot of application in the moment to moment. And maybe your office work runs different than mine, but again, we are on the move. I don't know a lot of people that aren't, don't have full lives. So how are we going to build anything meaningful when you're on such a, it feels haphazard, but you're just kind of outside, so it's going to be messy. So what we talk about, and there's several of these that we have, but I'd like to introduce at least these three to you. We talk about this more like guardrails, okay? Like our mission is like to, think through if you're, I know the picture of the bridge was really cool, but, the guardrails that are around the road, or if you think about a raging river is kind of more like our office that has banks on the side that the water hopefully doesn't get out of. So when you think about guardrails, what are some missional guardrails that we use to try to stay on the idea of going beyond the transaction? So the first guardrail that I want to talk to you about is being personalized and professional. Now, here's how that breaks down for us. If I'm your buddy and your friend, and you want to do real estate with me because we're friends, if I don't know what I'm talking about, we're probably not going to be friends very long. Conversely, if I know my stuff, all the things that I just went through, and I can tell you about the market and everything else, but I'm an absolute jerk, you don't want to do business with me either. Too much professionalism or too much personalization, those things can damage each other. So we use that as a missional guardrail to say we are personalized and professional. We understand the importance of knowing our stuff and being experts in our business, but we never use that to forget about the personalization of the business. And we never lead only with professionalism, because personalization is part of who we are as a company. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about methods here in just a minute and how we kind of flesh that out. But think about that as a guardrail. And as you think about that as a guardrail, what are the guardrails you use every day? Rather than telling you, here's what you need to do, what I'm trying to help you to think about is maybe whatever you need to do inside of this with that phone call that you get, but don't lose the personalization and don't lose the professionalism. And that's the way we try to break that down. That is not a universal approach, and that is not a generic approach. And I have found that, there's a session on AI happening right now, and I know that that's a very intriguing topic. But I have found in this season, as AI tries to figure itself out, that we actually have a lot of leverage right now, because there's a lot of stuff going on with robot calls. How many spam calls you get a day? And so when we talk to somebody, they're getting a personal service. And even though we feel like, on edge that we've got to get all this stuff right and our socials have got to be hitting and our platforms got to be whatever, I'm always thinking, how can we personalize this conversation? The next one is independent and cooperative. So when we think about our team, we know that we are independent folks, contractors, and inside of our independence, we also have a great deal of cooperation. So we have our Wednesday team meetings, and it gives us a chance to come together, personalize what we're working on, and be cooperative with each other. But then we always invite somebody in for lunch afterwards that's not on our team. And so we're always thinking about how can we be independent and cooperative. Those things don't have to be exclusive, and we use that as one of our guardrails. Lastly, we have several of these, but praying and celebrating. Sometimes we forget to pray and we go to work and then we don't celebrate what we see God do. Other times we forget that after all that praying and after those 2 years of work with Mr. Fleming and we actually sold the Walgreens site, We forgot to celebrate. We just jumped on to the next thing. So we use those two things as guardrails too, to be prayerful in the beginning and to be celebrating. And we know that after 25 years, God can do immeasurably more than we could have ever imagined when we started in the basement of my home. So those are the guardrails that we use. Lastly, I wanted to talk to you about our methods. I'm trying to give you some broad strokes here to think about this, but as we flesh out those guardrails, it might be helpful to you to think about these methods. So we talk about lunches and having coffee instead of just emailing and texting. We talk about, instead of AI-generated robocalls, knowing people's first names. I had a robocall 2 days ago, and it said, "Hi, first name, my name is Robert. I want to talk to you about your financing on this project." And of course, I deleted it like all spam calls or whatever else. Well, the AI had failed them, right? Because they were supposed to insert my name instead of saying first name. And I thought, wow, this is really bad. We talk about people over projects. We talk about stories a lot in our company and about how we see God working in the transactions we're working on instead of focusing on sales goals or traditional metrics. We don't even really know what our volume is year to year. We find that to be damaging to our vision. Often we say, "I don't know," instead of acting like we do. We like to try to think about kindness over being bitter, because you can get really bitter out there owning your own business. We talk about pioneering versus staying put. We talk about leveraging influence for others versus hoarding it for ourselves. We talk about loving community versus indifference. Indifference is worse than hate. So we talk about how we love community and how we can ask questions and serve others. We talk about engagement versus writing checks. We talk about educating versus manipulating, and we talk about being persistent versus being pushy. And for our purposes today, we talk about business and ministry versus business and a bit of ministry on the side. I love the quote by John Wesley. It says, "Do all the good you can by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as you ever can." I think that is what we try to do every day. And I know it's messy, but I believe God's called us to the mess. I believe that we can trust Him. And I believe that as we go about our day and as we focus on those things, what is the mindset that we need to have? What is the mission that God's given us? And then what methods do we need to use to approach that? It's kind of a way that stabilizes us in a crazy world. Everybody on our team has kids. We've got full lives. We've got minivans that don't work. We've got it all. So that's sort of the way that we roll. And when we think about meaningful relationships, as I said earlier, that is the most important thing that we do. It is everything that we do, and if we didn't do that, we wouldn't be in business. So I'd like to thank you for your time. I'd like to, again, I can't wait to get around and meet some of these folks and learn from all of you. We have to keep going. We have to keep going where the action is, because that's where Jesus is. So thank you all so much.